Sexual intercourse is a group of acts for the purposes of pleasure or reproduction. It includes, but is not limited to, the penetration of a vagina by a penis.
God, do you have to make it sound so clinical?
What? This is a socially progressive show. I can't say vagina.
Would you even know what to do with a vagina?
Of course I... Join in on the conversation on Twitter and Facebook.
Oh, stop. This is brutal.
You're brutal. Sex is an important topic. I really want to nail it.
If you're not comfortable enough to say the word out loud, you're not comfortable enough to be talking about this. Think about that. Join in on the conversation on Twitter and Facebook, and all together now, let's think about it. Don't have sex because you will get pregnant and die. This iconic Mean Girls moment is not far off from the sex education that a lot of high school students get in classrooms across North America. And what happens to kids when they hear their virginities being compared to tape or a stick of gum that if used more than once becomes trash? And what about LGBTQ+ kids who never even get a glimpse into their sexual futures in the classroom? What about women who are taught that masturbation is unnatural and that the female orgasm doesn't even exist? I'll tell you what happens. You get a generation of pent-up, frustrated, and repressed kids running around without a clue of how to properly protect from STDs or satisfy each other sexually. You know, like their parents and Connie.
I do fine. I'm getting it on. The semi-regular.
Your ability to bang and bang safely might depend entirely on where you're from. If you're from Podunk, Alabama, you might come out of high school sex ed thinking God is watching you masturbate and you got a one-way ticket to hell for engaging in intercourse before marriage. But if you're from the Netherlands, 9 times out of 10, you're going to reach for a magnum before sex and actually have a good time. It's also 5 times less likely that you and your partner will ever be faced with a teen pregnancy or an STI.
Sounds like the Netherlands is bang on with that. Hey, this is fun.
One more sex pun, and I'll make you describe the male sex organs in detail. Anyways, fewer than half of the US states require schools to teach sex ed. Meaning, as a child, your idea of sex might come from a sexy Russian singles pop-up ad or a quick peek into a Cosmopolitan while your mother cashes out the drugstore. And what's the result of this? Hundreds of cis-straight frat boys whipping around their penises with zero accountability. And on top of that, or bottom, you get a bunch of deeply closeted teens who think they have no chance of sexual freedom.
That seems like a stretch, though. I mean, we all find out about this stuff eventually. Plus, if I could have avoided hearing my 60-year-old gym teacher describing vaginal intercourse, I would have.
I mean, sure, I skipped health, not exactly for those reasons if you catch my drift. But seriously, how is it fair that math, a subject most of us will debatably never touch again in our lives, has zero flexibility in curriculum? Whereas sex ed, a class that's meant to teach sexuality, consent, and ultimately self-confidence, can be taught in whatever way the teacher feels. Most people, maybe not you.
Hey, math can be perfectly sensual.
Most people are going to have sex before they're ever faced with Pythagorean theorem again. Call me dramatic, but there's a much bigger picture here. Here are some real-life American statistics to put this in perspective. According to Guttmacher Institute, 37 states require that abstinence be included in sex education, while 26 require that abstinence be stressed. On top of that, 18 states and the District of Columbia require that sex education programs include information on contraception, but none of these states require that it be stressed. So basically, in the United States, the message becomes, don't have sex until marriage, please don't, and if you do, use a condom, but you didn't hear it from us.
Okay, but what about us in Canada? I mean, I know America isn't the only country to allow some seriously flawed sex education.
Canada's just as bad. Similar to the US, we create our sex ed curriculum on a province-by-province basis. Ontario just updated their sex ed curriculum for the first time since Google was invented, so that's a plus. But not without the backlash of angry parents with signs saying things like, oh wait, you know what, Connie, why don't you read these?
I refuse to be your token repressed friend.
Just do it.
Math, not masturbation. Science, not sex. And what's next? Safe animal sex? Like, no?
First of all, sex is science, so that's just not accurate. Nothing like a bunch of white PTA moms to take things to such extremes. And no one is trying to boink animals. The Ontario government just wants more open and accurate conversations on sex ed in classrooms. Capiche? Much like the Netherlands sex education model.
That seems reasonable to me.
Doesn't it? In the Netherlands, they focus on what they call comprehensive sexual education. It begins in kindergarten. Now, there are no explicit mentions of sex, but you will hear open and honest conversations about love and relationships.
Wat zijn ze steeds aan het doen op die plaatjes? Mees?
Knuffelen.
Aan het knuffelen. En wanneer ga je knuffelen? Merel? Als je iemand lief vindt, dan kun je knuffelen.
Kussen.
Of kussen. Want je kunt een heleboel dingen doen als je iemand lief vindt. Hè? Wat kun je nog meer doen als je iemand lief vindt?
Trouwen.
Trouwen, heel goed. Dat kun je ook doen. Ja, dat kan ook.
So digestible. I would happily put my kids through that.
I get what you're saying, but it's weird that you went with the word digestible. What are you, witch from Hansel and Gretel?
Yes.
Anyways, these conversations get little kids thinking about what feels good and safe and what doesn't. This may seem small, but this directly translates into ideas of self-image, self-identity, gender roles, self-expression, and personal boundaries. An expert on youth development for Rutgers WPF, Ineke van der Vlucht, from the Dutch Sexuality Research Institute behind the curriculum, says that all they wanted to show was that sexuality also has to do with respect and intimacy and safety. After elementary school, kids move on to a program called Long Live Love, which empowers and educates teens on healthy relationships in a sex-positive environment all throughout high school.
So I guess when you put the focus of sex ed on love and respect instead of politics and religion, the conversation is a lot easier for everyone.
Oh, 100%. And this isn't a new thing either. These programs have been around since 1990 and have only advanced since.
Damn. Now I want to be sex-eded by the Dutch.
You are such a dad. On that note, we know that Ontario is trying to follow in the Dutch's footsteps. Starting in grade 1, students will learn about body parts and hygiene and will work their way through puberty, sex, STIs, and a new and important topic, gender identity and sexual orientation. I know that through my Ontario abstinence-based sex ed, the option to be anything other than heterosexual was never presented to me. And I went to an arts high school, so you can imagine how that quite didn't line up with the, how you say, social landscape of things.
People are actually really scared of proper education about gay sex or anything not heterosexual. And this is happening right now. I got the chance to talk to LGBTQ+ activist and YouTuber Stevie Bobby about her experience being vocal about sex education for LGBTQ+ and queer youth on YouTube.
First of all, there's kind of no such thing as lesbian sex. There's just sex. And hi guys, I'm Stevie, and today we're gonna talk about my favorite thing. How to eat pussy.
Because the G-spot is basically behind the clit here.
What was your own sex ed experience like?
Oh God. Well, I grew up in the Texas education system, so I was told that vaginas are for periods and babies, and then when you get married, you'll find out the rest. Absolutely horrific is the answer.
Okay.
So bad. And of course, there was no mention of the fact that you can have sex, not only out of marriage, but and not die or get pregnant. But also that you can have sex with people of the same gender.
From your videos, what has the response been? Is there anything that surprised you with like where you're going with your channel, all the content that you're bringing out?
I am shocked every single day. I thought that people would be like, haha, you're making pussy joke videos. This is hilarious. Not like, thank you so much. No one told me it's okay to have sex. And it's a lot of people, or a lot of like kids that haven't had sex yet. So that is so terrifying to navigate the world as someone who's in the closet maybe, or doesn't know any queer people, but on top of that, they have no idea how to experience or experiment with their sexuality, even if they aren't ready to do it yet.
Right.
You know, like I think that we should obviously be teaching kids what sex is and how to have it before they have it, because that's terrifying. So I think that queer kids were left out of that equation and also already isolated.
How do you think education systems can do better in sex ed?
Holy shit. How do I think they can do? a bare minimum would be like it being fact-based and not religious and shit. I don't know. And not shameful or scary. Like frightening people about STIs is fucking gross. Fact-based.
Yeah.
Queer inclusive. Gender inclusive. Sex ed would be amazing. We got a real low bar right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, real systematic barriers.
Holy dental dams, Batman.
You're telling me the homophobic backlash is too much. Without resources for LGBTQ+ youth, anyone who is not only straight has only one option: porn, which isn't great. And within formal ed in Canada, most of it stems from parents' fear that anal will be taught in the classroom. First of all, demonstrating anal sex to students was not Kathleen Wynne's plan, no matter how controversial she is. And in grade 7, students will simply be introduced to the concept of anal as well as methods of contraception. And yes, they will also learn about different kinds of sexual orientation and gender identity. As long as Canada's Charter of Rights permits gay marriage, there is no reason kids shouldn't learn about it in school.
I think it's great that we're finally having these conversations with kids. I think I read somewhere that as of 2013, only 5% of US LGBTQ+ kids ever actually get a formal lesson in class on what sex might mean to them. I mean, thank God for the internet, but that's just not fair.
No, it's not. And I mean, we learned in our Why Are People Getting Gayer episode that we definitely are. So why are educational systems still choosing to ignore those students? Why are we so afraid of progressive and inclusive sex education? A 2015 GLSEN study found a direct correlation between inclusive curricula and a student body that was more inclusive of LGBTQ+ students and identities. It's as simple as that.
High school is hard enough as it is. Let's just treat people like people instead of getting all wrapped up in personal beliefs.
Exactly.
But what if parents don't see it like we do and still aren't comfortable with this curriculum? Do they really have a choice?
Parents do have the right. It's in the Educational Act. And it's not just sex ed. They can pull their child from English if they were offended by rumors of William Shakespeare's bisexuality. You won't, however, be able to pull your child from the portions of the curriculum that explain that Johnny can have 2 mommies or 2 daddies. That part was decreed Ontario law under the Anti-Bullying Bill in 2012.
Tomato, tomato. Being victimized under Kathleen Wynne's gay agenda. Become a decent human being.
Well, this has been a whirlwind.
Hasn't it? Thanks for this longer than usual intern segment. I think you're really getting the hang of this.
Thanks, Connie.
Maybe next year you'll be sitting in this chair instead of me.
Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Maybe next time you decide to say something corny, you can go ahead and think about it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Let's take some questions from Twitter and Facebook, shall we? How do we encourage sex ed in learning spaces online? I feel like the most obvious learning space is definitely YouTube. I feel like there were so many YouTubers, that are out there trying to start those conversations, but that is only accessible to people who are looking for it, right? I feel like I remember when I was growing up, in grade 8, there was this weird London Middlesex health unit game where they were trying to teach people about contraception, and we played it one time, and it was these superheroes with really phallic arms, to say the least, and you had to accomplish all these missions. And I feel okay, as ridiculous as it was effective just because it was so overt in its messages, and I think I remember there being posters and stuff in public and stuff. Not that that's bad, I guess, but it was just so in your face that it did spark that conversation. I don't know. I feel like there are so many opportunities. I just feel like we need to be more. We need to be more willing to have those conversations, and I feel like there need to be more spaces where people can ask questions, because we're coming from this experience of North American culture, but there's cultures that are way more taboo than us that this doesn't come up, and there's cultures that this is part of dinner conversation, or even just families that this is part of dinner conversation. So I feel like everybody's coming from such a different space, and we need to be able to have those conversations in a positive and healthy way that's accessible to everybody. What else? Why is inclusive sex ed so controversial? I feel like, I mean, it's so obvious, right? Like it's a taboo thing in our society, yet we talk about it, we sexualize everybody, and we like shove it in everyone's face constantly. Yet as soon as it's like, hey, maybe we should learn the facts about this, it's like, oh, no, shut up. Like, it's so backwards. Like, we shouldn't be able to have billboards with like women's like sexuality being like sold to us without being able to have conversations about like why that happens and that it's okay to express yourself in certain ways like that. Like, that's fine, you know? I feel like we can't have both, like just the one side of it, because sex is like everywhere. Like as soon as it hits like 6 p.m. on cable news, like it's over and done with, and like sex is every channel. Like it's just like, you know, it's hard to avoid. So I think we need the other side. Okay, we're blowing up here, sorry. What do you think about integrating relationship advice and sex ed about helping young? For sure. There's so many, like I know from personal experiences, like there's so many unhealthy relationships, and those two go hand in hand. Like having these conversations doesn't mean that everybody has to start banging left and right now. That's not it at all. It's that we should be able to let people choose what they want to choose, and like I feel like relationship-wise, like that's the basis of that. Whether or not you're in a relationship, like, you know what I mean? Like, these things need to happen because high school is when things start getting real, and a lot of people get hurt in relationships, physically, emotionally, and, you know, it's important to have conversations where we encourage, like, healthy behavior, just like anything else. Are there things that you think can be eliminated from the current sex ed model? Do you think that, yeah, my teacher straight up said to me, like, well, you know, we don't know what people are going to think about you if you go around having sex. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't even be allowed to say that. Like, it doesn't, I feel like you shouldn't be allowed to enter the classroom with personal biases. Like, it should just be the most neutral conversation ever. Like, facts, let's have an open discussion, that's great. Like, I'm not gonna sway you left or right. Like, you almost need like a team of teachers to do this properly, because I feel like it goes wrong so quickly. Like, I don't know anybody from this area of Canada or North America who's had like a positive experience. Do you think separating boys and girls is counterproductive? Kind of. I feel like there's certain things that, like, it's a unique woman's, or I mean, you don't have to be a woman to have a uterus or whatever, but like there's such a unique experience that people with uteruses have, that I think it's really valuable to have conversations where it's just like girl on girl here, whatever, because that's such a, like, you know, it could be really empowering, and it creates a safe space for people to talk about their issues. Like, I have the best conversations like about that kind of thing with just my girlfriends, you know? And it's so important to encourage that, but also everybody's doing it, so let's bring them all together for the big stuff. I think I remember reading an article also going with what Morgan's saying here, like about how oftentimes like boys find porn on the internet at like age 8, and that's so young, and I'm sure it'll get younger. Like, I feel like because that's an epidemic, I feel like we need to be having conversations about that from a young age. Like, I don't know, in, you know, digestible ways for like kids to understand. I feel like, because kids are abusing these resources at like too young of an age, and then they don't know how to process that information, and there's nobody there to like pick up, you know, and give like aftercare almost. Like, I feel like that's so important. All right, kids, there's a lot happening here, so I'm going to probably have to end it. Feel free to continue the conversation in the comment section. If you want to go and learn our resources, learn from our resources, you can go to thinkaboutit.xyz/learn. Also, we're selling really fun t-shirts for a fundraiser for women in film and television. So you can go to thinkaboutit.xyz/donate. Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have our last episode of this entire show on at 9 p.m. So tune in for one more really great episode and one more really great conversation. We'll see you in a bit.